You slept. You slept well, or adequately, or at least enough. And you woke up tired. Not the kind of tired that coffee fixes. Not the kind that a day off resolves. The kind that has been there for a while, underneath everything, regardless of how much rest you get, regardless of what you do to address it. Most people, when they feel this, assume it is physical. They assume they need more sleep, or better sleep, or a different routine, or a holiday. And sometimes that is true, but there is a specific kind of exhaustion that is not physical, that sleep does not fix, that holidays do not cure. That is not about the body being tired at all, but about the emotional processing system being depleted. Emotional exhaustion is what happens when the part of you that feels things, empathizes with people, regulates your own responses, manages difficulty, shows up emotionally for yourself and for everyone who needs you. When that part has been running at a level that exceeds what is being replenished, for long enough that it is running on empty, and it shows up not as breakdown, not usually. It shows up as habits, small, ordinary, easy-to-miss habits that look like being tired, or being introverted, or being difficult, or being lazy, but are actually the system telling you something very specific about where it currently is. Today, we're looking at 10 normal habits that reveal you're carrying emotional exhaustion, not to add to the weight you're already carrying, but because recognizing what is actually happening is always the first step toward addressing it. And a lot of people have been managing these habits for months without knowing what they are. What is emotional exhaustion? Emotional exhaustion is a state of chronic depletion of the emotional and psychological resources that allow a person to function, feel, connect, and regulate effectively. It is distinct from burnout, which is more specifically about the depletion that comes from work-related overload, and distinct from depression, which is a clinical condition with its own diagnostic profile. Emotional exhaustion can co-occur with both of those things, or it can exist entirely independently of them. What produces it is sustained emotional labor, the ongoing work of feeling, managing, caring, empathizing, and processing that does not get sufficient replenishment. This can be the labor of caring for others, children, elderly, parents, people in crisis. It can be the labor of navigating a difficult relationship, or a difficult environment, or a sustained period of loss or uncertainty. It can be the labor of managing your own emotional experience in an environment that is consistently demanding. The emotional processing system has a capacity, and when the demand on it consistently exceeds the replenishment, it depletes. And depleted systems show up differently from healthy ones. Habit 1. Disproportionate irritability at small things. Something minor happens. The internet is slow. Someone leaves the cabinet open. A small change in plan that would usually be completely manageable, and the response, internal or sometimes external, is larger than the situation calls for. This is one of the clearest and most commonly dismissed signals of emotional exhaustion. Dismissed because it looks like being impatient, or being difficult, or having a short fuse, as though it is a character quality rather than a resource issue. What it actually is, the emotional regulation system, the part of you that normally provides the buffer between stimulus and response, that normally allows you to absorb minor frustrations without significant reaction, is depleted. The buffer is thin. The tolerance for additional demand, even very small demand, has simply run out. The person who is irritable at small things when emotionally exhausted is not a different person from their usual self. They are their usual self, running on significantly less than what that self requires to function at its characteristic level of patience and equanimity. Habit 2. Making even small decisions feels exhausting. What do you want for dinner? Which of these two options? Does it matter whether we do this today or tomorrow? and the question lands with a weight that it shouldn't have. Not because the decision is important, but because the act of deciding, of weighing, evaluating, choosing, requires a cognitive and emotional resource that is currently in short supply. Decision fatigue. The phenomenon by which the quality of decisions deteriorates after a sustained period of decision-making is well documented in the research. What is less discussed is its relationship to emotional exhaustion specifically. When the emotional processing system is depleted, the bandwidth available for even routine cognitive tasks decreases significantly. The person who is emotionally exhausted often finds themselves unable to make even small decisions, not because they are indecisive by nature, but because the act of deciding requires more than is currently available. And so the decision gets deferred or delegated or defaulted to whatever requires the least engagement, not from apathy, but from genuine resource scarcity. Habit 3. Withdrawing from things you used to enjoy. There are things you used to look forward to, the social plan, the hobby, the activity that used to feel like relief or pleasure or rest. And now, when they appear on the horizon, something in you contracts rather than opens. Not because you don't still value these things, not because they have changed, but because engagement, even with things you love, requires emotional energy. And when the emotional energy is depleted, even genuinely enjoyable things can start to feel like demands on a resource that simply isn't there. This is one of the habits most likely to produce additional guilt and self-criticism in the person experiencing it. They know they used to love this thing. They know they should want to go. The gap between who they think they should be and who they currently are produces a specific shame. What is wrong with me that even good things feel like too much right now? Nothing is wrong with them. The system is depleted. Enjoyable things require energy too. And when the tank is empty, the distinction between things that take energy and things that give it can temporarily collapse. Habit 4. Difficulty accessing genuine emotion, a specific flatness. Something happens that should produce an emotion. Good news, a touching moment, something that would normally make you laugh or feel moved. And the expected response is flat, present on the surface but not quite connected to anything underneath. This is not the absence of emotion. It is the specific experience of emotional depletion. The system that processes and generates emotional response is running so low that the normal responsiveness is diminished. Things still register. They just do not land with the depth that they would when the system is resourced. This flatness is often frightening to the people who experience it, more frightening sometimes than pain would be, because the flatness feels like a loss of something essential, like the part of you that responds to life is temporarily offline, like you are watching your life rather than living it. It is not permanent. It is not a sign of who you are becoming. It is a sign of where the system currently is. And it is one of the clearest signals that what is happening is depletion rather than something more fixed. Habit 5. Going through the motions. Present but not experiencing. You're at the dinner, or the meeting, or the conversation. You're saying the right things. You're responding appropriately. And you have the distinct sense that you're performing your life rather than living it. That there is a version of you present that is going through the correct movements without the experience that is supposed to accompany them. This is sometimes described as dissociation. And at clinical levels, it can be. At the level most people experiencing emotional exhaustion encounter it, it is the specific consequence of operating on depleted resources. The automatic behavioral patterns can continue running even when the underlying engagement that is supposed to power them is absent. The person going through the motions is not phoning it in by choice. They are not absent because they don't care. They are operating from a system that has run the authentic engagement down to a level where what remains is the behavioral skeleton, the form without the substance that should animate it. Habit 6. Postponing anything that requires emotional output. There is a conversation that needs to happen, an email that requires a thoughtful response, a person who has reached out and deserves a genuine reply, and it has been on the list for longer than it should have been. Not because you have forgotten it, not because you don't care about it, but because every time you approach it, you recognize that it requires something that you don't currently have. Emotional labor. The work of producing a response that is genuine, considered appropriately emotionally tuned, requires emotional resources. And when those resources are depleted, the tasks that require them are the ones most likely to get pushed. This produces a specific secondary guilt. The avoidance of emotionally demanding tasks is easily interpreted by both the person doing it and by others as neglect or indifference. It is neither. It is the same resource issue that makes small decisions feel heavy and enjoyable things feel like obligations. The specific hierarchy that emerges when emotional energy is scarce, in which the tasks requiring the most of it are the ones that feel most impossible. Habit 7. Small tasks. Feeling disproportionately heavy. The dishes. The reply to the message. The one errand that is genuinely minor and has been somehow undone for 4 days. And each time it appears in awareness, it produces a response that is disproportionate to its actual scale, a kind of dread or overwhelm that the task itself cannot quite account for. When the emotional processing system is depleted, the experience of tasks, even small tasks, is affected. The bandwidth available for everything narrows. What would normally be processed easily as minor and manageable becomes, through the lens of an exhausted system, something that requires a specific gearing up that the system cannot reliably produce. This is one of the habits most likely to be misidentified as laziness by the person experiencing it and by anyone observing it from outside. It is not laziness. It is the specific narrowing of available resources that emotional exhaustion produces. The same narrowing that makes small irritations feel large and small decisions feel impossible, applied to the simple logistics of ordinary life. Habit 8. Difficulty with empathy. Not from coldness, from depletion. Someone you care about is struggling, and you want to be there for them, genuinely, not performatively. But what you are finding is that the availability that being there for someone requires is not currently accessible. That the act of holding space for someone else's difficulty costs more than it usually does, and takes more from a supply that is already low. This is sometimes called compassion fatigue, most commonly documented in caregivers, healthcare workers, therapists, but it is not limited to people in those roles. It is a specific consequence of a depleted empathy system. The same resource that is normally freely available for genuine care and presence is running low, and maintaining the appearance of availability while the resource is scarce requires an effort that is both costly and, over time, unsustainable. The person experiencing this often carries significant shame about it, because the gap between who they want to be, the caring, present, available person they usually are, and who they are currently able to be is one of the most painful features of emotional exhaustion. The caring is real. The capacity to express it is depleted, and the two things existing simultaneously produce a specific guilt that compounds the original depletion. Habit 9. Sleep that doesn't restore. You sleep adequately or even generously, and you wake up not rested, not refreshed, not with the sense that what was depleted has been replenished. Physical tiredness is primarily addressed by sleep. The body repairs, consolidates, restores during rest. Emotional exhaustion is not resolved by the same mechanism. Sleep addresses the physical component. It does not address the depletion of the emotional processing system, which requires something other than physical rest to replenish. What replenishes it varies by person. Solitude for some, genuine connection for others, creative engagement, physical movement that is chosen rather than obligated, time in nature, the specific experience of doing something that produces genuine pleasure rather than performed engagement. The person who wakes up tired after sufficient sleep is not sleeping badly. They're not physically unwell, usually. They are carrying something that sleep was never designed to address. And the continued hope that tonight's sleep will finally fix it is one of the more poignant features of emotional exhaustion. Habit 10. The desire to disappear. Not from sadness, but from zero demand. Not a dark wish. Not something born of hopelessness or despair. Something much more specific. The fantasy of a period in which absolutely nothing is required of you, in which no one needs a response, a decision, an emotion, an opinion, a presence, an effort. The desire to disappear that emotional exhaustion produces is not the desire to not exist. It is the desire for zero emotional demand, for a space in which the depleted system can exist without being asked for anything, for the specific relief of not being needed for a period long enough that some of what has been spent might begin to return. This is worth distinguishing carefully from suicidal ideation, which is a clinical presentation requiring immediate support and which is characterized by a wish to not exist, not simply a wish to not be obligated. The emotionally exhausted person who wants to disappear wants to come back. They want to come back rested, restored, able to be who they need to be. They just cannot figure out how to get from where they are to there without some period of genuine release from demand. The fantasy itself is a signal, not of danger, of the level of depletion that has been reached, and of what the system most specifically needs. Not more rest, but less requirement. Not isolation, but the specific relief of a period in which nothing is asked. 10 habits. Each of them ordinary. Each of them things that people with emotional exhaustion have been attributing to laziness or weakness or some fundamental inadequacy for weeks or months or sometimes years. Emotional exhaustion is not weakness. It is not evidence that you cannot handle your life. It is what happens when the demand on the system consistently exceeds what is being put back in, when the output of emotional labor has not been matched by the input of genuine replenishment for long enough that the reserves are gone. The habits on this list are not character flaws. They are signals. The irritability, the flatness, the going through the motions, the sleep that doesn't restore, these are the system telling you something. Not that it is broken, that it is empty, and that empty systems need to be filled before they can function at the level they are capable of. Filling an emotionally exhausted system requires something more specific than rest. It requires identifying what has been depleting it and reducing that where possible. It requires identifying what genuinely replenishes it, not what should replenish it in theory, but what actually does for this specific person, and doing more of that. And it often requires the specific acknowledgement that the level of emotional labor being asked of the system is not sustainable at the current level of replenishment. That acknowledgement, that honest assessment of what is being spent and what is being returned, is often the hardest part, and also the most necessary. If this named something, share it with someone who might need to hear that what they're carrying has a name, and that name things can be addressed. Take care of yourself. We'll see you in the next one.